Hi everyone, welcome to the session. Today we're going to explore how you can connect Amazon S3 to a n8n workflow. Specifically for this session, we are going to explore how to do it via Amazon EventBridge. EventBridge is kind of like a service bus service within Amazon. It allows you to have events that you can then create rules for events and then trigger certain other processes within your AWS account. We're specifically going to use the HTTP endpoint rule or trigger, which is going to allow us to basically send an event to a generic HTTP endpoint. I'd really recommend using EventBridge for this use case because it doesn't require any code and it is quite easy to set up purely through the AWS console. It's important when you're building applications that you leverage the AWS services as much as possible without having to have custom code. It just means it's a little bit more resilient. You don't have to update the code or the runtime environment as often. And they generally tend to scale pretty well, so you won't have to worry about scaling at any point. Now, the use case itself, I've seen quite a few times. It's quite a common pattern. You know, you have a small business, you have a startup, you have something that you need to upload and trigger some sort of process off the back of. I've seen this with, certain HR processes. Maybe you've got a data set that you get every week from a vendor or a supplier, and you need to then either remove fields, you need to update fields, do certain calculations, maybe you then need to put them into a database. You can do this all triggering off the back of this process. The essential part is it's only going to start from the S3 upload. It's going to trigger the workflow. And obviously, once you've got the file in n8n, you can do any sort of processing off the back of it. So it's very versatile and a very cool workflow. I'm going to show you exactly how to set it up. But first, let me show you a demo of how it works. So this is the workflow that we're going to build in this session. It's quite simple from the outside. There are a few moving parts which we will go through step by step. But essentially, we've got this webhook over here. As with most n8n webhooks, you get a URL for this. I'm just using the hosted n8n. This can obviously be your own self-hosted version of n8n too. We are going to show you how to set up a auth header, which I highly recommend to keep this endpoint secure so that only specific applications can send events to this workflow. Although the URL is unique and probably people won't be able to guess it, it's always best to have some sort of authentication on the end of it. And in fact, I think with Amazon EventBridge, you might actually have to have authentication. But we're going to show you how to do that because it's the best practice in any case. And then from there, we're just using the download file S3 node. We've set up a credential, which we'll show you how to do. And essentially, it's going to just download the file that comes from that event. So from here, obviously, you can do whatever processing you want to do on the file. I will leave that up to you as to how you do that. So to show you it in action, I'm going to just execute the workflow so that it's listening for a webhook. Then I'm going to go over to S3 where I've just got a bucket set up. I've obviously configured it to send events to EventBridge. And the way that I will trigger it is I'm just going to upload a random file. So I'll just add a file here. I've been working with creating LinkedIn banners. So I'm going to just put that up here and then I'm going to hit upload. When I do that, I get a nice green OK that it's done. And if I go back to n8n, we'll see that it has been triggered. If we open up this webhook, you can see the event coming in from S3. And then the second one is obviously downloaded the file. And if we go view here, you can see that the file is now available. So obviously from here, you can go and do your own process off the back of that. So that's the demo. I'm now going to go over the architecture briefly, but if you want to just get into building, I suggest you just jump ahead to when we do that. So here we have the architecture that we're going to create for this workflow. It starts off with our S3 upload over here. So we're going to, as I showed you, you basically upload the file to S3. What we need to do is on the S3 bucket, we are going to set up S3 events to set that S3 events such as upload object, put object, create object, get object. Those kind of things are sent to EventBridge. So you need to set that up first. Once it goes into EventBridge, EventBridge is a kind of bus service. So you can think of it as like a pipeline, and lots of events get pushed into EventBridge. And then the way that you trigger stuff off the back of an event is you create something called a rule. We will create a rule specifically for objects being created. So that's when you push an object, it gets create object event. So we'll create a rule so that only on those events, we will then trigger a HTTP target. And we'll configure that HTTP target with our n8n webhook URL. There's another component called a connection, which is kind of just, handling things like restarts and retries and those kind of things. It's not super important. We'll just set that up. And then by the end of that, we'll have EventBridge basically pushing that event into our n8n webhook. So that's what we're going to build today. It's quite simple. I'm going to show you every single step to create this. So don't be worried. Let's go over and start in the n8n console. So here we are in the n8n console. We're going to start in the create workflow view. We're going to start off with the webhook trigger. So we're just going to create that block here, like so. We're going to set the method to a post method because we want to have a body to our request. The path we can keep as per default. The next thing we want to do is set up authentication. So as I mentioned before, authentication is highly recommended on just any workflow that you create in n8n. I think in specifically the HTTP endpoint URL for EventBridge, you need to actually have authentication. I haven't really found a way to do it without, but I think it's a best practice, so I'd recommend you do it. So to do that, we need to create, if we go here, we can see that there's a couple of options available for authentication. We're going to do a header-based auth. And what that means is we're going to provide a specific token that's going to be in our HTTP request that's in the header that n8n will check for in order to know that this is a authenticated request. It's the most basic form of authentication, I think. There are more sort of robust, secure ways to do it, but this is, I think, good enough for a basic use case that we're just going to show. The next thing we can do is we want to create a new credential. Just ignore these. That's from my previous iterations. We'll start by giving it a name. So I'm going to call this S3 trigger auth. So with HTTP requests, you have a header, which is a key and a value that is sent with the HTTP request. So in this dialog, name is going to be the key and value is going to be the value that it has to match in order for the request to go through. You could put this as whatever you want. Usually a best practice is to have it something related to your actual application. There are, if you're using other third-party APIs, they might have their own headers. So I'm just going to use n8n webhook like so. So the next thing to set is the secret. It's important to keep the secrets safe. You don't really want to have it like lying around, but for this use case, I'm just going to use a unique ID that I've created in my terminal. So it can be whatever. Just keep a note of what you've put here because you will need this to set up the request that's being sent to this webhook. So with the key name and the key value set, we can just hit save. And then we just go back into here and we make sure that this S3 trigger auth has been set. And we're just going to set it to respond immediately. The thing to bear in mind with this webhook is that when S3 sends the event, it actually doesn't send the payload of the object. It just sends an event saying like, hey, this object has been created. Here is the bucket, the key, and some metadata about this object. So we're just going to respond immediately. And then in our next step, we're going to actually download that file from S3. So now that we've set that up, the next step is we'll just close this off for now. The next step we want to do is a S3 download. So if we go to the side here and we just search for S3, I'm going to use this AWS S3 one. This is just the one that I've used before. And I'm going to go to download a file. The first thing we want to do is select the credentials. So if we can think about it, our first block is going to receive a webhook. The second block is now going to call to S3 to download that file. So we need to provide it with AWS credentials that allows us to authenticate with the S3 service to download that file. So I've got some set up here before. I won't go through how to set up the authentication between n8n and AWS. I've done that in a previous video. I'll create a link below with some documentation on how you can set this up. But essentially what I've done is I've created an n8n user. I've attached an S3 read-only policy, and I've added it as a credential inside of n8n. As I said, more details below. I won't do this in that video because it just takes a bit more time than what we have at the moment. So I'm going to choose this AWS S3 read only. This is going to be your credential set. I'm going to just set the resource as file, download. We'll add the bucket name and file key in a moment. We just want to trigger a workflow to do that so that we can use the nice drag and drop functionality to actually connect up the different events. So this is fine for now. We'll just close it off, and we're just going to make sure that these two blocks are connected. So that's the basic setup. We've done a little bit of prep work in the workflow. You can see there's a little red warning sign because we haven't set that bucket name and key yet. But what we'll do is we will go over to AWS. We'll set up the event part. Then we will trigger an event as our test event, and then we'll be able to then map those buckets and keys in our download file. You can do it ahead of time if you know what those keys are, but I don't know those keys off the top of my head, so I'll just show you a way that you can do it, or how I would do it if I was just doing it by myself. Cool, so let's just make sure that we've saved this for now. Let's go over to the AWS console next to go set up our AWS setup. All right, so here we are in the AWS console. The first thing, as always, is to just make sure that we are in the correct region that we hope to be working in. As I've mentioned in many of the previous videos, the best practices here is to either be as close as possible to your users or to be as close as possible to where your n8n installation is installed. You may or may not know where that is, but you might have, for instance, a self-hosted version in Frankfurt. And in that case, you might want to make sure that you use the Frankfurt region. Firstly, because it's just going to be faster to do it like that for either your application or your users. And if you, additionally, if you are using self-hosted version, you tend to have a better cost profile if you're sending data between two instances or two applications that are in the same region. So picking the region is quite important. I've just gone for Stockholm just to be a bit different this time. And also because I don't regularly use it, so it has less stuff going on. So now we've chosen the right region, let's go over to our S3 console. So you can either click on that button here, or you can go to the search over here, and you can just search for S3 like that. So here from the S3 console, you can see I've got a couple of buckets already, but what we're going to do is we're going to go and create a new bucket. We can keep most of these things as default. The only thing you'll really need is a unique bucket name. So my best practice is to copy an account ID, and I'm just going to call it S3 to n8n and then prepend my ID. That just kind of generally makes sure that it is unique. It can be whatever you choose. You can put the name of your company or whatever in there. The rest is all defaults. You can tag it if you want to keep track of some of the costs associated with this bucket. But you can generally keep the rest as is. So I'm just going to hit create bucket. Right, so here we have our bucket. It's this S3 to n8n. And you can see that it's empty. Now that the bucket is set up, we need to be able to send events from this bucket to EventBridge, and then from EventBridge into our webhook in n8n. So to do that, we need to first of all configure the S3 bucket to send events to EventBridge. Now, by default, an S3 bucket has lots of events that come out of it, things like uploads, files being deleted, all of that kind of stuff. But you need to enable that to be sent to EventBridge first before you can start to add rules in it. Like if you go to EventBridge and you try and set it up and you don't do this next step, you're not going to see those events coming through in your application. So the way we do that is we go over to properties here. And then we got to scroll down, and then we'll get to the section called event notifications. And under there, you'll also see this Amazon EventBridge. So we can see that it's currently set to off, which means that notifications will not be sent to EventBridge. So to change that, we're just going to hit edit. We're going to switch this to on, and then we're going to save changes. So with that change, we've now configured our S3 bucket to send events to Amazon EventBridge. So now we can start to add rules to basically work off the back of these events. So the next step is to go over to the Amazon EventBridge console. So we'll go up here, and I'm just going to type in EventBridge, and then we'll go over to there. Here we are in the Amazon EventBridge console. And where we're going to go from here is we're going to go over to the left, and we go down to rules. And here we can see all of the rules that are configured to react to certain events on our bus. EventBridge can have multiple buses, but by default, when we've set up our S3 to send events to EventBridge, it's going to come on the default bus. You can have multiple buses, but I'd say that's a sort of separate topic. We can see that there's one that's created from my previous example, but what we need to do is just go over to create rule. Here in the first panel, we will give it a name. So I'm going to just call it S3 to n8. So I'm going to give it a name of S3 to n8n v2. You can give it a description if you want to just describe what it does. Maybe you want to say that it's going to a specific type of workflow or whatever you choose. You can choose the bus. We've only got a default bus at the moment. The next thing is we want to set it to react to a rule. So you can either have a rule, which is basically it will pattern match to the event that's coming through EventBridge and then react, or you can have a schedule. So if you wanted to set up a cron style schedule, you can do that too. But we're going to set it to a rule, and then we're going to hit next. So here is where we're going to set up the rule or the pattern for the rule. And the pattern is essentially how EventBridge decides whether to trigger the downstream action or not. So when there's an event that comes from S3, we're going to tell it to match to specific types of events. And when it sees an event that matches that type, it's then going to go and trigger our downstream HTTP endpoint request. So we'll leave the source as AWS event because it's coming from S3, so it's an AWS product. We will then use the creation method. We'll use pattern from. The event source is AWS, and the service name we'll just search for S3. And we'll choose this simple storage service option. Then we can choose the event type. We are going to use the Amazon S3 event notification. There are some other options, but the S3 event notification is a more real-time option. There is another option here, for instance, to use CloudTrail, which is a little bit delayed, still gets the same result, but we're going to use the S3 event notifications. And when we do that, you can see it starts to build this event pattern on the right here. And this is going to basically have more and more details about which specific events we want to react to. We only want to react to specific events, and we're going to select from this option here. We're going to just select object created. So you can see there's a couple of options here. So if you wanted to trigger events based on different other S3 actions, you can do that here, but we're just going to use object created. So the next thing we're going to do is configure a specific bucket. So if we kept it like this, it would respond to any object created in S3. So that could be quite a costly exercise. So we're going to specify our specific bucket. And I've copied the bucket name, and I'm just going to paste it in here. So from here, we can see if we just remove all the spaces. So we're only going to react to a specific event in this bucket. It's only going to be object created and only events that come from the S3 source. So this wizard basically helped us set up that pattern. And the next step we're going to do is we hit next. The next thing we're going to do is set up the target. So we've defined how the events will be triggered in this rule. Next, we need to say where the event will go. It can be a lot of different AWS services, but for this use case, we're going to use the EventBridge API destination target. The next step we are going to go to is we're going to create an API destination. So this is going to be how we configure our EventBridge rule to know where to send our event. So that's going to be in our n8n workflow. We're going to give it a name. So just bear in mind that it has a limit in terms of the what types of characters can be here. So I'm going to just set this as AWS to n8n. You can provide a description which will just help you to identify this connection or API target later. The next is the API destination endpoint. So we will go and fetch that from our n8n environment. There's two URLs that you get with a webhook node. You get the test URL and the production URL. I'm going to show you first of all with the test URL. So we can first of all map those fields to the next block. But also I want to show you how you can actually tweak the API target if you need to make changes later down the line. So let's start with the test URL, which I've just copied to clipboard. Then we go back and we just paste it in here. We're going to set the method to post because it's going to have that payload. We can set an invocation rate limit, which I would recommend if you're using self-hosted, because if you have a big burst of requests come in, you can potentially knock out your self-hosted instance. We're going to leave it as optional for now because I'm not expecting a large traffic spike in this application. The next is the connection configuration. So we're going to create a new connection here. This is where we're going to define where the request is going to be coming from in the AWS account. So you can have both a public and private connection. So if you wanted to connect to something that's inside of a VPC, perhaps you've got self-hosted n8n inside of a VPC, you might want to trigger an endpoint in there. In our use case, because we're using the public n8n and we've got public endpoints, we want to make sure it's a public connection. Here again, we can provide the connection name. So I'm just going to go AWS to n8n. Again, it's got the same character limitations, so just bear that in mind. You can provide a description. We're going to set it as public. And then the next thing is authorization. So here we've got three options. We're going to go with the API key. Because we've set that up on the webhook on n8n side. All we need to do is copy over the same headers that we've set for that configuration. So just as a reminder, we can go back to here. It's going to be whatever's in this authentication header here. So if you want to go check it out, you can just go check here. But it's going to be here. It's going to be X. So we've set that up to match what we have in our webhook in n8n. So that should allow authentication into our n8n workflow. You can set parameters to HTTP. We don't need to do that. You can set the type of encryption. I recommend keeping it as default. Here we can create a new role. So that's just the IAM role that's attached to it. So if you wanted to call other AWS services, you might want to do that. There's additional settings here like the retries, things like that. You can configure and play around with yourself. You don't need to for this demo. We're just going to keep everything else as default. And with all of that, we'll just have a final check. Okay, and then we hit next. This last step is just to define tags if you want to. It's optional and just helps with cost tracking down the line. Recommended if you are working with a production environment. We don't need it for this demo, so I'll just skip over it and hit next. Here we have the review panel where we can just review everything that we're going to create for this rule. We've got the rule event pattern over here. It's matching to our bucket name and our object created event. Next, we have the target, which is set to an API destination. Some of the parameters you can see, and then there's the tags. So that all looks good. So we're just going to hit create rule over here. All right, so now that the rule is created, this v2 rule over here, so let's go and test this to see that it works. Here we are back in the workflow view. So we're going to start off our testing process by going into the webhook, and we're going to go listen for events. Before we do that, we just need to resolve this little exclamation mark here, because that's going to prevent us from actually executing this workflow. So just open this up, and for now we'll just put in null and null, and that's just going to temporarily resolve that little exclamation mark. And so now what we can go in is we can open up this webhook. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to hit this listen for test event here. So what that's going to do is it's basically going to wait in the background, waiting for that event. And we're going to go and then trigger it from S3. We're going to make sure that it comes into this node, and then we'll go and map that event to our S3 download node. So let's go over to S3 bucket. We'll go into our S3 to n8n bucket here, and then we'll go upload. We'll go to add files. I'm going to add my LinkedIn banner again, and then I'm going to hit upload. And then from here, let's go back to n8n. And yes, we can see that it has now picked up this event. So that means that everything is configured correctly. We can see here's the name of the object. So it's LinkedIn banner. And you can see some of the things like the time. So we can also go and check the JSON, and you can see that there's quite a bit of information that comes through. The ones that we most specifically are looking for are this S3 to n8n. So this is the bucket name, and we're looking for the object key. So those are the two pieces of information that allow us to go then and fetch that object from S3. It's also interesting, you can see the webhook URL and execution mode. So if you wanted to have a different workflow for test and prod, then you can do that too. So with that done, we can now go, we can just close this off here. We can now go to the download file block. So we'll open that out. You can see now it's populated nicely for us. So I'll just remove this, and I'll remove the key. And so what I'll do is I'll just choose the bucket name. I'll just drag it into here, and then I'll choose the object key, and I'll put it in there. And so now we've configured the event objects to basically pick up those inputs. If we can execute the step, let's see, yeah, it does go and fetch that object. So you can see we've used the credentials, got the object, and if I can go view, I can go see what that image looks like. So that's it. And if we go back, we can see that the full workflow is working. The next thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to update the endpoint in AWS. So the reason why is because sometimes as you're building your application, you might want to just go, you might be tweaking things as you go. Also, if you've built something for test and now you want to put it into production, you might want to just change that URL. So we're going to do that. We're going to first of all go to this webhook here. We're going to just swap over to the production URL. I'm just going to copy this over. And so now that's on our clipboard. We can go back to our EventBridge console. Here from the EventBridge console, this is the rules view. So what we need to do is we need to go down to integration to API destinations. And from here, we can see the API destinations that we've got available. So I've got the one that I set up a few days ago when I tested this first, and we've got the one that we created today. So there's AWS to n8n. So to edit it, we're just going to click on it to open it out. We can see a bunch of details about the API request endpoint, things like that. We can also see, the secret that is being created for our API key value. And so what we're going to do is if we want to edit this is we're just going to the top and we're going to hit edit. And here you get a view to edit whatever you want. I'm going to just change this URL for here. I mean, you can change whatever you want in here. And this is just, I'm showing you how to change this. If you ever need to, change the endpoint from maybe you moving from self-hosted to managed n8n or something like that, you might want to just change that. So if I hit update like that, so now that it's updated to use the production endpoint, we can effectively productionize this. So first we'll go over to n8n. We'll just make sure that this is saved, which it is, and we'll just set it to active. So now that it's active, I'll just clear these executions. So now that it's active, it's just basically listening all the time on that production endpoint. And then now we can go back to our S3 bucket. I'm just going to upload a file again. Let's just go add files. I'll just do this LinkedIn banner v5. And then we hit upload. And then that should send the event. And then if we go here and then we go to executions, we should see this latest execution here. And we can see LinkedIn banner v5 view, and you can see that it's coming through. So that would be how you productionize your application. So that is essentially it, but I will show you one last thing before we go off and delete all of these things so we don't incur any extra costs or unexpected costs. And that is, if we go back to the EventBridge console, we can go over to event buses, and we can go over to this default event bus. And over here in monitoring, so some of the things that we can see are invocation attempts. So that's giving you an indication of messages that are going onto this bus. And the other thing to look at is we go over to rules. If you're looking at a specific rule, you can open up the rule and then also see metrics for that specific rule. So here we can see just in the last moment, if I just go to 3 hours, you can see like here we are actually seeing invocations. So this is an indicator that we are actually processing events. It's important to keep this in mind because if you do see spikes in this or anything like that, you might need to just keep an eye on it, especially if you've got maybe an unbounded process that's maybe upstream, because you can potentially incur costs that may be unexpected. So just keep an eye on these if you are running this in a production environment. So that's the monitoring. The last thing we'll show you is just how to clean everything up. So I'll start in n8n. Yeah, from n8n, it's quite easy. We can just go to these dots over here and we can archive this workflow. That will just deactivate it and archive it. You can also go over to credentials and you can delete your credentials. So that would be this S3 trigger auth. So we can just go there and delete. The next thing we can do is we can go over to our EventBridge console. So from here, we can go to rules. In the EventBridge rules, we can just select the rule we want, and you can either disable it if you just want to temporarily disable it, or you can select it and delete it, and you just hit delete, and that will delete the rule. It's enough to delete the rule, and that will stop sending events to the webhooks. The last thing to do is we can just go over to the S3 buckets, and we can go, if we just go close here, from the S3 console, you'll need to go to the list view. The first thing you do, select the bucket that we want first. We'll have to empty first, permanent delete. So this will delete all the objects in the bucket first. And then we can exit. With all the objects deleted, then we can actually delete the bucket like so, and then delete the bucket. And then the last thing you can do is sometimes if you go to secrets manager, it's not going to incur any cost really to have a secret hanging about. But what you might see is that there is a secret created for your connections, or there's two secrets actually. And so what we can do is we can just select the first secret, go to actions, delete secret. They'll ask you to give a delay. So that's just in case you accidentally delete something. And we can go back and we can just do the same thing for this other secret. So with those two deleted, we can go back, we can see all the secrets are deleted. And that's essentially it for cleaning up this workflow. Great, so that's the end of the session. Hopefully it's been useful. Hopefully you've learned something new that you can then go and apply in your next workflow or n8n applications. If you want more from me, just put any comments below. Happy to read those and get some feedback. I'd appreciate it if you follow Makeups, have a rummage around in the description below. Until next time, enjoy building on AWS and n8n.